I think not. If you feel wronged, blame yourself or the father.
This cannot be.
The leader. He lives.
Final Fantasy Tactics originally released on PS1, ushering in the start of the Ivalice world created by Yasumi Matsuno. Final Fantasy Tactics War of the Lions was released on PSP a decade later by a different dev team than the original game over at Tosei. This version has since been on mobile devices too. 18 years later, after multiple emulated or mobile releases, we now have Final Fantasy Tactics The Ivalice Chronicles, developed by Creative Studio 3 over in Square Enix with more of the original dev team on board. Thank you to Square for providing me with a Steam copy of the game and the other platforms you'll see I bought myself. This video is made possible by all my patrons and YouTube members for keeping the channel going and the quality documentation of info provided by places like Final Fantasy Tactics, Game Facts, The Cutting Room Floor, and the Final Fantasy Fandom Wiki. Thank you to Town Knave who provided substantial and valuable data as well as feedback for this video, as well as Anna Karistina who has an incredible breakdown comparing excerpts of the localizations between the PS1 version and War of the Lions. If you're at all interested in how the Japanese version of the game reads, it's worth taking a look at her blog. As we'll see, it's not as straightforward as you would think. So let's start with Final Fantasy Tactics on PS1 and see how the game was changed when it was brought overseas. In the English version, we lost the 4 visual novel, or rather sound novel, minigames. The gameplay you're seeing of it is thanks to the romhack Final Fantasy Tactics Prime. While sound test was retained, music test was lost via naming Ramza to this. The English version of the game was made easier. JP costs for abilities were decreased for several white magic, black magic, yin-yang magic, summon magic, draw out, cloud's limits, jump, charge, and a handful of reaction support movement abilities. This is ultimately good with reducing how much JP you'll care to grind for. For time magic, Demi 2 and Meteor cast faster, and for Yin Yang magic, Petrify cast faster too. For summon magic, most of them are faster while a handful are also stronger. And for Cloud's limits, Braver, Cross Slash, Meteor Rain, Omni Slash, and Cherry Blossom were buffed in damage. Take note of course that you still recruit Cloud at level 1. And one more big gameplay change. So in Tactics, your job level is determined by its accumulative JP. In the US version, the amount of JP required for levels are reduced. While that's more minor for the player, enemy units are generated by having a set job level in one job, which may not even be their current one. They're then given enough JP to reach that job level, resulting in enemy units in the North American version being given significantly less JP, and which abilities an enemy unit will have are determined randomly depending on how much available JP they have as well, so less JP for enemy units means that they can't access as many abilities. Prerequisite job level requirements for many jobs were also lowered. Most of them are by 1, but it adds up and ultimately saves how much JP you'd grind for. Some playable characters had their stats buffed, including Ramza, Dalida, Olin or Orin, and Cloud, while some bosses had theirs nerfed like Velias or Belias, Kuhalin, and Weegraf. Notably, Weegraf in Chapter 3 had lowered HP, speed, and physical and magical attack, so even though he's a notorious fight, he was even harder in Japanese. Elmdor's job before had the Safeguard ability innate to it, which prevents you from stealing his equipment. This was removed during the last fight with him in the English version, so his Masamune and Genji equipment can be stolen. Dialogue text displays faster, all except for these opening chapter moments where they were accidentally left at their vanilla speed. Characters had special quotes when you select their name on the status screen, but these were removed from generic units in the English localization. The PS1 version of Tactics has a number of bugs in both languages that are patched going forward. The biggest one was that certain jobs let you manipulate how much JP they had available by page scrolling and buying a technically grayed out ability on the list, and this could result in infinite JP for the job. There's also glitches for item duplication through extra copies of some weapons you couldn't normally buy, and the oil status is bugged and doesn't actually do anything. Next up, we have Final Fantasy Tactics War of the Lions for the PSP. 2 new jobs were added. Onion Knight is easy to unlock and potentially stat-wise the strongest job, but it has no abilities and doesn't gain experience for levels and instead depends on how many jobs you have mastered. It's a time sink to make stronger and arguably isn't worth it by late game. The other job is Dark Knight. You have to work to unlock it by mastering Knight and Black Mage while having Dragoon, Samurai, Geomancer, and Ninja at level 8, as well as dealing the killing blow on 20 enemies and collecting crystals from them. Conversely, their stats lack, but they have absurd attack abilities, and female Dark Knights get move +3, much like how bards have mood +3 for men. War of the Lions adds PvP and PvE multiplayer modes, melee and rendezvous. These are ad hoc only, so if you did want to play these online, you would have to use a workaround like X-Link Kai. There's many new rewards for multiplayer as well, such as weapons that previously you'd only be able to get from the Deep Dungeon or Midlight Deep. There's new FMVs throughout the game's story. In Japanese, these FMVs only have subtitles, but overseas, there's English voice acting. The opening attract mode FMVs were removed, and the original's opening and ending story FMVs were replaced. There's a few new story filler scenes and battles in the main storyline. Most revolve around what certain characters did off-screen from Ranz's parties, such as Wheatgraph, Ovelia, and Delita, as well as some side quests are new in Chapter 4. These moments are more filling in gaps that weren't terribly crucial, though they did add some nice items and gave these characters brief moments. War of the Lions also adds characters like Balthier from Final Fantasy XII, who's got gun abilities and has notable speed worth putting jump on him, and Luso from Tactics A2, who's a valuable poacher thanks to it being innate to his class, but otherwise his class is identical to Ramza's without the unique gender fluid stats. The sound novel minigames are still not available in English. You can listen to music in the sound test now though. You now just have to name Ramza this. The difficulty changes that were made in the English PS1 versions were reverted, so many things are aligned with the Japanese PS1 version, so comparatively some allies are weaker, some bosses are stronger, some charge times are longer, job prerequisites were reverted, and Elmdor has Safeguard again. There were further changes to balance though, so it's not entirely identical to the PS1 Japanese version either. Wheatgraph in Chapter 3 was nerfed even more. The maximum roster size was also increased from 16 units to 24 units. This is enough for all of the story characters, Balthier Luso, and the 6 initial generic units. The mantra abilities from Rafa or Rafa and Malik or Marek were buffed. They're generally higher damage, more accurate, and strike up to 10 times up from 6. The ability Holy Bracelet or Holy Breath from Marius is also capable of more max hits as well. Moreover, regarding Rafa, she's now capable of learning truth or mantra skills as soon as she's joined in Chapter 3 rather than waiting until Chapter 4. The crush equipment skills used by Meliadul, Falmarv, and Orlando were buffed in that they can damage enemies even if they don't have equipment to be crushed on unless they have the Safeguard ability, which means that they can use these attacks to damage monsters now, and if they do have equipment to be crushed, they deal bonus damage. Now regarding Cloud, during Chapter 4 there's a number of steps you have to follow to first bring Cloud into Ivalice, and once you do, on PS1 he can't actually be recruited until after you progress the story a bit, but in War of the Lions you no longer need to progress the story once he's brought into Ivalice. Before at Fort Besselat, your objective wasn't to defeat the enemies but to activate 2 switches, which let you have your units free to level each other with no enemies to beat until you activated the switches. Now in War of the Lions the battle ends as soon as all enemies are defeated. And as an aside, on PSP you can't soft reset, so you have to close the game and open it again if you're trying to avoid random encounters. Bugs have also been fixed so you can't get infinite JP, duplicate weapons, and the oil status effect actually works now. With being widescreen, the UI was properly adapted for it, but War of the Lions has frame rate issues and slows down when the frame rate drops, and every time anyone uses an ability or item, the game drops to 15 FPS, therefore the game speed drops by 75%. And this is unavoidable in practically every fight in the game. I've also read for ages that the game is stretched to 16:9, but that's not actually true at all. War of the Lions is slightly stretched, but it's not to that degree. There is objectively more screen real estate compared to the PS1 version. However, the slight stretching does cause the game to appear blurrier than intended, as we can see if we correct it with a fan-made patch that sets the game back to perfect pixel. Not to go on too much of a tangent, but games are not meant to be played at perfect pixel, it is meant to be stretched to 4:3, but regardless it is still a sharper appearance than before. Audio is also notably lower quality in War of the Lions, both sound effects and music. Given the rougher and rushed nature of the original English localization, the entire English script was rewritten and text was fleshed out. The PS1 version's English is significantly simpler and truncated, but also has awkward reading moments and mistakes. War of the Lions reads more flowery and is similar to games like Vagrant Story or Final Fantasy 12 or 14, possibly a step above them though. I've read for ages how War of the Lions is less accurate due to its embellishments, but it turns out that's not the entire story. Now, this was always a generalization about the entire localization, but the examples from the script we'll look at quickly are only from the beginning of the game, so it isn't a complete dismissal of the generalization, because literally, sometimes, yeah, the PS1 version can be more transliterate, but tonally, it's a nuanced situation where for every line of the PS1 version that's more transliterate, there's another line on PS1 where the nuance of the Japanese script's tone isn't accurate, like Ivalice's classical manner of speaking in Japanese, or the PS1 version misinterpreting this additional jab at Agrius from Gafgarian. Then for every unique embellishment to War of the Lions, there's another embellishment that's tonally more accurate because the PS1 script in return is truncated, such as the restoration of Alazam's specifically humble way of speaking and his curtain metaphor. But everything like that to the side, overall, conversations and the plot are easier to follow along in War of the Lions, and Matsuno has spoken about his appreciation for the War of the Lions localization, though the original game script can be easier and much faster to read on a line-by-line basis, so it still maintains its fans. It also still has its moments from being a byproduct of being rushed and more punctual. As you may have gathered from how I've addressed certain terms, many new name changes were made in English all across the board. Terms, stores, menu options, statuses, terrain types, characters, chapter titles, organizations, enemies, nicknames, titles, locations, jobs, monsters, abilities, equipment, errands, and treasures and items were changed in names. For example, with jobs, priests are now white mages and oracles are now mystics. There were a few references in Tactics originally that weren't retained in War of the Lions in English. Chapter 4 was originally titled Somebody to Love in reference to the Queen song, but now is renamed to In the Name of Love. The floors of Deep Dungeon or Midlight Steep before were references to the 1979 Vietnam War film Apocalypse Now, though now they have their own original names. Tutorial info and text is also written better and offers more detail, and an odd omission from War of the Lions is spell or ability quotes when characters use abilities. War of the Lions is also available on iOS and Android. There's no multiplayer function to these versions. The items earned from multiplayer before are purchasable at the first shop or poacher's den after beating the game, and they'll actually remain purchasable in future playthroughs as well. You can also skip cutscenes. Suspending a battle in progress was a feature that had to be removed, though Android added a quick save feature. Both versions also have stayed updated and feature updated assets. However, depending on how old the Apple device is that you have, you may not have the updated assets and will be on an older version, though we're talking about devices well over 10 years old. One of the biggest issues though with the mobile version that I have seen nobody really address or talk about is people will point to how this version runs at full speed, meaning you don't have the PSP version slowed down, but when you actually look at it, it's pretty apparent that the game on mobile is actually running at more than double the speed. As far as I can tell, looking at other people's footage all over YouTube, anyone that's playing the Android or iOS version is playing a version of the game that is simply running way too fast. Maybe that's not bad if we just find the game too slow, but it is of course just technically not the intended speed of the game. And now we'll talk about Final Fantasy Tactics, the Ivalice Chronicles. The Ivalice Chronicles has been developed with the proprietary engine of Final Fantasy XVI by more of the original team than War of the Lions, so keep that in mind. Moreover, the source code of the original game on PS1 was lost, but note that War of the Lions was not. The Ivalice Chronicles is interesting in that it does not feature War of the Lions content, but it does feature War of the Lions changes. This means no Onion Knight, no Dark Knight, no Luso, and no Balthier. According to the game's director, these two were in War of the Lions because they were to help promote Final Fantasy XII and Tactics A2 at the time, and they have been cut because they don't have a game to promote now, though the sound novel minigames are finally localized. Scenes that were pre-rendered in War of the Lions are now in-game again, but War of the Lions pre-rendered cutscenes are viewable in full original quality. They've also been revoiced with the new English voices and feature Japanese voices for the first time.
Argoth's words trouble you, am I not right?
There are things beyond the power of our changing, Ramsa. Try though we might.
Do not say that. If a thing can be endeavored, it
Will endeavor grant me an army?
Argoth's words trouble you, do they not?
There are things beyond the power of our changing, Ramsar. Try though we might.
Do not say that. If a thing can be endeavored, it...
Will endeavor grant me an army, Ramsar?
Moreover, the Ivalice Chronicles features both an enhanced version of the game as well as a classic version of the game that resembles the PS1 version, though interestingly it still features War of the Lions gameplay changes and bug fixes, albeit there's no content additions and the unit limit is still 16. That being said, everything going forward will pretty much be regarding the enhanced version. The game's core difficulty is preserved while giving the player more tools via quality of life and more information via UI that's more intuitive to handle the challenges. The in-game resources for information are robust too, with how to utilize each job, and even informs you on stat modifiers and stat growth differences between the jobs. Speaking of, the Ivalice Chronicles features a new easy difficulty and a new hard difficulty. Across the board, the difficulty settings modify how much damage you deal and damage you take. For Tactician difficulty, the player has minus 30% damage while AI gets plus 20%. There's also some minor gameplay changes too, such as on Tactician, Arithmetic's damage is nerfed, bombs self-destruct won't actually blow them up, and between both difficulties we'll find enemies on an individual level that were given flat stat bonuses or decreases. In some fights, generic units even get these changes, but unfortunately they won't retain them if they're recruited. A huge general change is that you no longer have to commit to movement. You can move a unit to a tile and judge or see what they can actually do from that tile. However, specific movement abilities like any sort of regen will lock you out of undoing your movement, so units with those abilities do have to commit to movement like in prior versions. Moreover, when placing your units, you see the battlefield, and during skirmishes, you can even see the enemies on the board as you're setting up. You also have access to all jobs and equipment menus while placing units in battle in case you need to change jobs while planning. While the War of the Lions gameplay changes are present, Elmdor actually lost Safeguard again, so just like the North American version of PS1, you can steal his Genji equipment in Masamune again. Yes, units are much more limited in terms of what you can do with them until they're actually recruited. To compensate, there's more changes to the units, such as when most of them are actually recruited, you'll now find that they already have some levels in a different job and have all the job's prerequisite jobs leveled appropriately. So some examples, Rhea starts with Dragoon being level 8 and Meliadul starts with Dancer at level 6. Rafa and Merrick oddly had their starting JP nerfed. Conversely, they were buffed in that their abilities are more likely to hit the center tile. Cloud now starts with level 8 and Samurai, which of course comes with all of his prerequisite jobs leveled too. Cloud has some other buffs too, like not only does Cloud now start with the Materia Blade, enabling him to actually use limit abilities right away, he will start at your party's level now too. To compensate for starting with the Materia Blade, a new Materia Blade Plus was introduced. Also, he was buffed in that his limit abilities have faster cast times. Granted, these aren't as damaging as they were on North American PS1. Beowulf starts with level 5 Bard. Moreover, his Spellblade abilities can now be used even when he's silenced. Jobs underwent some slight rebalancing. Keep in mind any gameplay balance changes from the North American PS1 are still gone, since they weren't present in War of the Lions either. Many abilities were made much faster, including some white magic, time magic, most summons, all of the aim abilities, and of course Cloud's limits. Also, Protectja, Hasteja, and Slowja cost less MP, though notably Lich now costs more MP. For summoners in general, the increased speed is a big buff and once again helps them compete with black mages outside of raw damage numbers, considering their abilities are still pretty fast and of course they can lock onto targets. Additionally, the State of the Realm mechanic from Final Fantasy XVI was brought in, which is just a way to read up on the plot, lore, and character relations on the fly from the map just so you can keep up with all of the moving cogs in the game's story. And part of the game's more intuitive UI, the game also spells out mechanics you wouldn't know about before without reading about them outside of battle. An example is if you try to cast a spell without enough MP, the game lets you know that the spell will actually go off if your unit gets enough MP before the actual spell is gonna cast. This was always a thing, but now you're told about it. You're also given a proper warning when you're about to enter a series of battles, which features dedicated UI for the upcoming gauntlet. When you recruit generic units, you're given a whole selection at once. You can't filter who you recruit by gender anymore, but stat differences between male and female still exist, though equipment is no longer gender locked. So then with handbags, before any female unit could equip them, but now only bards and dancers can equip them. Moreover, the worst or best zodiac compatibility isn't determined by gender anymore, but by species. We've got autosaves now, and you can also now have up to 50 saves over 15. And classic mode actually has an autosave too. The world map has more routes on it to move faster, and the information regarding what's at each major location is provided in a menu. When you game over, However, you aren't thrown out to the title screen anymore. Now you get the option to retry the battle or go back to the world map. You can now also have up to 50 units, you can save loadouts for equipment and abilities on a unit, hold R1 to speed up movement and dialogue in battle as well as movement on the overworld map, flee from random encounters or simply evoke a random encounter on a specific location, retry a battle or even return to the map mid-battle as long as you're okay with losing any progress made in the battle. A good handful of these quality of life changes are great in that they save you from potential soft lock saves and or from soft resetting your game, such as when trying to just move across the map without getting into a battle. While War of the Lions featured new battles in that it offered a little more exposition or filler, the Ivalice Chronicles adds optional, unique character interactions into existing battles if you bring along the right named units. There's a lot of unique conversations between characters if you bring along characters like Agrius, who talks to Gafgarian or Delita. Mustadio also has new dialogue to hear as well as others. Spell quotes have also returned, though not for generic units. Thanks to the game having full voice acting for both Japanese and English, both languages' scripts went through another round of revising. For English speakers, for the English script, I'd say if you found the flowery text of War of the Lions to be a little too much, the revisement tweaks make it sound more natural when spoken aloud, and it helps to hear this kind of dialogue spoken aloud anyway when following along, and is done so with European voice actors who are usually classically and theatrically trained. The enhanced version features upscaled graphics and filtered sprites, and a subtle burlap texture overlay that tries to replicate the effect of dithering. Once again, the developers have said that the sprites were smoothed out like this for the sake of scaling them, which to its credit, these sprites do look better when you zoom out compared to the sprite deforming that does happen in the prior versions when you zoom out. However, the classic sprites put into the enhanced version do not have this deformation. There's also this optional tilt shift blur that you can either disable or only turn off for battles if you only want to see it in cutscenes. Meanwhile, the classic version is the correct aspect ratio, and they did make sure to try to give you as much screen real estate as they could. Pre-rendered FMVs are notably AI upscaled, and it mostly sticks out, especially when text is on screen. Of course, performance-wise, everything is fine across the board now. Everything is full speed. This is the first time summon animations are at a correct speed officially with no frame drops. They do almost feel like they lose impact, or as if they were designed around dropping in frame rate in the original game, which is not unheard of at all, and why some emulators do try to maintain lag, but you can get used to this. Upon looking into it, I have found that the Ivalice Chronicles looks identical between all consoles except the Switch 1. However, the trade-off of being slightly blurrier is an equal frame rate across every platform as well. On the map, a location with errands being run will also have an icon. The entire unique side quest chain involving Mustadio that ends up in recruiting Beowulf, Reyes, and Cloud now have unique map UI and indicators after you've initiated the side quest chain. Before, the combat timeline could either be found by pressing triangle with no unit selected or left or right on the D-pad when about to select an ability to cast, so it was context sensitive to access the info. Now there's no extra buttons necessary with the timeline always present on screen. You've also got this new bird's eye tactical camera view as well. When selecting a tile, you can also toggle the height you're selecting. Before, if you wanted to select a lower or higher tile, you just had to sit on the spot and wait for it to cycle to the other height. The music thankfully does not suffer the lower quality of War of the Lions. Sound effects in Classic are how you expect them to sound, while sound effects are mostly redone and enhanced, though not all of them. Final Fantasy Tactics made its mark as a PS1 classic. The changes present in War of the Lions stand valid, seeing how many of them the original dev team adopted into the Ivalice Chronicles, though a case can be made that the original content to War of the Lions is unnecessary. It is content that didn't return though. However, the Ivalice Chronicles had its own more careful way of incorporating more exposition and character interactions. Out of the box, the Ivalice Chronicles sprites may need you to get used to them, though it's got a lot going for it in that version otherwise, as well as a way to just play something resembling the PS1 version visually. Of course, I'd be a fan of more built-in options, and it'd be nice to have the original sprites offered officially. And if you've played the game before, tactician difficulty may be a fun way to twist things up a little bit, though ultimately it's not anything that reinvents the game. Well, anyway, that's all for this video. I have many videos like this on the channel if you want to check them out, and more in the pipeline. Now, I've spoken about it on stream, but due to how often remasters and remakes release nowadays compared to 5 years ago, I'm reevaluating how the channel goes forward while maintaining quality, but stay tuned for more port reviews. That's all for now, and thank you all for the continued support, and I'll see you all in the next video.